So you should be able to be seen by men and women. Set up exactly that way. I think so. Move this down a bit. Welcome to Yarche Kala Tov Shin Pei Beis 5782. As the situation is, Rabbi Johnson, our Rosh Kollel, usually does the introductions. In recent years, has to be in isolation. So therefore, I take this great honor and pleasure to welcome everybody here today. I know there have been already 2 shiurim, 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock, but the 12 o'clock slot is, of course, the main lecture session. First of all, in general, the Yarche Kala program has been going, I think, for almost 40 years, if not 40 years. It's a tremendous program, and it is a tremendous credit to our community, and of course, to you who are here, and those also who are on Zoom, who are taking time off their holidays to learn Torah. A very, very special schus, and a very, very special channel of bracha. The first time I was involved in Yarche Kala, I think it was back in 1990, 1989 or so, and I wrote to the Rebbe and asked for a bracha for Yarche Kala here in Melbourne. I asked for a bracha for Hatzlocha Mufloga, for outstanding success. Took a bit of liberty to ask for Hatzlocha Mufloga, not just Hatzlocha. And the Rebbe added the word, the Chesed Yad Kochi, with his holy handwriting, next to the word Hatzlocha Mufloga, the Rebbe added the word Bakoil. Bakoil means in every aspect. And the Rebbe added the words V'godoil Zchus Talmud Torah Derabim. Great is the merit of communal Torah learning. The word Bakoil also is a word that the Rebbe connected when it was the year of Tafshin Nun Beis, Tehei, that's 5752, and the Rebbe made the Rashi Tevis explaining acrostics from those words. Tafshin Nun Beis, Tehei Shnas, Niflois Bakoil. Niflois, God, should be a year of Niflois wonders, Bakoil in everything and God in it in the whole year. The Rebbe also made a connection. The word Niflois is Nun Plois. Nun is 50, Plois is wonders. The word Niflois is based on the word Tele, Plois. And we are now Tafshin Pei Beis. Tehei Shnas Plois Bakoil. Plois God. So that letter Beis comes into play here as well. And so I also want to make mention of the fact, of course, that Torah, all of our blessings, this was the Rebbe's message to us constantly. You want to be blessed? Learn more Torah, perform more mitzvahs. They are the channels of our brachas, as it says in the beginning of Parshas, B'chukaisai, Im b'chukaisai teilechu. That's mitzvah say tishmeidu, if you toil in Torah, if you follow the mitzvahs, you do the mitzvahs, and then Hashem gives all of the material blessings. And also to make mention, I must, on this day of Chov Beis Tevis, the 22nd day of Tevis. So the word Tevis comes from the word Toiv, also, goodness. And Chov Beis, the Rebbe, in a very unique way, revealed that the day of the 22nd of the month, of any month, is a blessed day. Chov Beis, turn around those two letters, you get the word Bechor. Last Shabbos, not yesterday, the Shabbos before, by Yehi, we read the word of the great bracha of Yaakov to his grandchildren, Ephraim and Manasseh. Bechor Yivorech Yisrael. In you, through you, people will be blessed and bless their children. The Rebbe revealed that the day of Bechor, Chov Beis of any month, is a day of unlimited, unending brachas. Amazing words. So today is Chov Beis, and we are coming together to learn Torah, the source of all brachas. And so therefore, may Hashem shower upon all of us his blessings, materially, spiritually, begashmis, beruchnis, begashmis, gam yachad, in a revealed way for every one of us and for all of us in Kollel Yisrael and that it's Yisrael. Amen. And now I have the great pleasure and honor to introduce our guest of honor, our scholar in residence, and actually a very, very close and dear friend of mine, Rabbi Yehoram Ulman from Sydney, who is one of the Dayanim, the senior Dayanim of the Beis Din in Sydney. He's also the head of the Beis Chabad for the Jewish Russian immigrants who came to Sydney, and he is a renowned halachic expert in the field of fertility and halacha, and so also marriage and halacha. And he's going to be giving us insights into various aspects of halacha and areas of marriage and fertility, etc., as you've seen on the program. Rabbi Ulman is referred to, and he is called upon by Rabbanim around the world for his expert advice in these fields. And actually, he was blessed by Hashem, besides all of the talents that he had, to be able to actually give out, to publish his first treatise of Chuvas of Responsa. And I was Zoicha merited to get a gift from him. And this is the copy he's going to be referring to it. Some of the topic material is included in the Sefer, Milishkas Hadoroim. And I would like to wish him publicly Mazel Tov on this major achievement, and may be the first of many. Yagdil Torah v'Yadir. So please welcome Rabbi Yehoram Ulman. If anybody wants to ask questions, please note them down. Don't ask them during the lecture. Note them down, and at the end of the lecture, Rabbi Ulman is very happy to spend some time on answering your questions. And must thank our sponsors for the Color program. The general program is sponsored by Melbourne Office Supplies. Thank you very much. Also charity. And today's particular sessions are sponsored by Aaron's Rubbish Removal. We don't tell you that it removes all the rubbish.
Everybody can hear? Yeah. So first of all, thank you very much, my dear friend Rabbi for your introduction. I want to thank also Rabbi Johnson, who is not here today, but he's the one that gave me the opportunity to speak to you today. Also, special thanks to Rabbi Barber, who made all the arrangements and organized everything, to all of you for coming here today. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I think the topic I'll be talking on different aspects of Yuchsin throughout this week, including areas of genetics, how they can impact and how they can assist us into determining our status, if and how. I'll be talking about how fertility affects our status. But today, I'm talking about something that really buzzed the Jewish world all around. And I remember just a few weeks ago, I was in Eretz Yisrael for a 5-day trip. And I woke up one morning and I had so many messages from all different rabbis around the world. Some of them asking me, this headlines that a Muslim young man said that he was a observant Jew. He married under a chuppah a young Jewish woman, a frum woman, and it was discovered sometime later, very, very soon after the chasana, that he wasn't Jewish at all. There wasn't even a question that he was born a Lebanese or Syrian Muslim. And the question was, how was it possible to happen? Others, some of my students who are trained in this area, were telling me that it's about that the rabbinic world, especially in America, where it's very disorganized. We have other countries, but maybe a little bit less Haredi in America, but there's a certain level of organization, a certain level of structure. In America, it's like a Wild West, where everybody does no accountability a lot of times, and everybody does what they want. So how was it possible that such a thing could have happened? So that's what I wanted to discuss today. First of all, how do we prevent such things from happening? Is it important? How far do we go? Because all of us know that the most essential condition for a young couple to stand under a chuppah is that they both have to be Jewish. Later we'll discuss some nuances when both are Jewish, and nevertheless there could be some problems. But everybody knows, even the most uneducated Jews know that basic principle that a chosin has to be Jewish and a kala has to be Jewish. We don't believe in intermarriage. And what is the definition of a Jew? That's something which not everybody knows. There are a lot of people who know that you have to be Jewish, but not everybody knows what is the definition. And definition is something that was established 3,333 years ago at Har Sinai, that a definition of a Jew is either somebody born from a Jewish mother or somebody who converted according to halacha, according to Jewish law. Why is it so important for us? The question of me, who is a Jew? The answer is, if it wouldn't be important to us, we wouldn't be sitting here today and we wouldn't be having Ashikala. Because the fact that the Jewish people cared about preserving our identity, according to the definition of the Torah, that was the only way that we were able to survive despite all odds. People can ask a question, okay, so we can understand if there's a mistake is being made and a woman, the Kala is not Jewish, that affects the children are not Jewish, the grandchildren forever. But what's the big deal if the chosin wasn't Jewish, the kids are still Jewish? Well, the answer is that the Eibishter created the world. That on one hand, I think Judaism is the only religion that I know that doesn't demand of others who were not born Jewish to convert to Judaism. I think every other religion that I know, whether it's different strands of Christianity, Catholicism, Greek Orthodoxy, Baptists, Lutherans, Calvinists, you name it, and Muslims, you go to the other religions, they really all believe, some more actively, some passively, some more aggressively, some less aggressively, but they all believe that if you don't convert to their religion, you're going to burn in the fires of hell forever and ever. And Judaism, while we believe that there's only one truth in the world, which is the Torah, we don't believe that a person has to attain their connection to Hashem and a destiny to change the way they were born. Everything is b'hashgacha pratis. Somebody's born a Jew, he can't change that, and he is not allowed to change it, and he can't even if they want to. But if somebody is born a non-Jew, they can attain the connection to God and be ethical, good people without converting. But on the other hand, this division is being made. And when God created what's called in different languages, different name for it, but that's called the famous name in English, the soulmates. We believe that every neshama has its half. The neshama was sort of created as a one unit, and at a certain point it was separated, and a couple comes together. The only way that you could meet one's soulmate, if a Jew meets a Jew and a non-Jew, and it's a travesty for both of them if intermarriage takes place. And that is why it is essential to be able to determine that the Chos and Kala are Jewish. Now, the first question which we ask, and something which we have to look into the poskim. Okay, we agree that that is the case. But who said, what does it say that when a person comes to a rabbi and says, Ivri Anoichi, ich ben Ayid, I'm a Jew, who says that you have to be able to ask any questions? Who says that the person is not to be trusted and you have to make any kind of inquiries? Because we see that's a very interesting paradox. That on one hand, if you look into the reality today, we see that any responsible rabbinate based in a community which has some kind of order, it is a given that there has to be some sort of clarification, verification, certification of a couple. You can't just accept it. On the other hand, if you look in the primary sources, and I want to just go very, very superficially because the time doesn't allow us to go deeply into it. But if you look in the primary sources, it seems to be that that wasn't the case in the beginning. If you look in starting from the two Tosfos, Tosfos was the very early medieval Rishonim, following the generation of Rashi for a number of generations. There are two Tosfos, and one on Gemara Psachim, in the very beginning of Gemara Psachim, and two Tosfos in Gemara Yevomis, Daf Mem Hey Mem Zayin, that seem to indicate that when a person comes to a bezdin without any prior chazak, doesn't have any kind of proof, or even any kind of a legal presumption that he is Jewish, he is believed, and there's no need to clarify it. That's what it seems to be from that Tosfos. And it looks to be that almost all of the Rishonim, based on those two Masechtas in Bavli, maintain that the Iker Hadin, that from the letter of the law, that is the case. There's no need to clarify. On the other hand, we see that's not the case today. And we see that if we open up the Shulchan Aruch, Even Ezer is that part of Shulchan Aruch. There are 4 parts to Shulchan Aruch. And the one which is the most specialized and the one that really has the greatest impact on the Jewish people is Even Ezer, because that's the one that really is talking about the question of Yuchsin of our statuses. So in Siman Beis, I'm going to read only one part. It's brought in a few different achronim, but in Siman Beis, the Berhetev says, he brings a number of achronim, and he says, "V'tur kosa b'shem harama." He brings the tur, which was still the one the Rishonim, the name of the Rama, which is another Rishon before him. Misha ein mishpachta yedua. If one's family is not known, lonu, to us, to our community, to our base, lo yamrinan shu b'cheskas chashas. We don't say that such a person has a presumption of being Jewish. Lochen yesh lahachmir. And therefore, you have to machmer, and you have to be able to investigate. And he brings over here by Shmuel, Bechin Kosev, and he brings over here by Hillel, Mishabo me'eretz acheres, whoever comes from a different land, from a different community, and ish or isha, whether man or woman, a bocher or besula, or young bocher or young lady, or alman or almona, or a widower or widow, tzorich raya, Shu Yisrael has to bring a proof that he's Jewish. V'av shemisnagim, even though he may be behaving Kedas Yisrael as a Jew, like this Muslim boy, he was acting as like a Haredi boy, and even though he's behaving as such, umedabrim bil shanein, and speak our language, whether it's Yiddish or whether it's any other Jewish language that is spoken in this particular community, and they throw in yeshivish words. And they know halachas, they know many things about Yiddishkeit. Afal became nevertheless they need to have a proof. And he says something very fascinating. Now, it seems over here, from what he says, that this was an accepted protocol in Lithuania. Lithuania was a general term for all of the countries north of Ukraine. That they wouldn't do any kiddushin before investigating. You saw there is a Jew, so this seems to be, and Berhatev comments over here on the fact that even though technically from the words of Rishonim it seems that you don't have to be able to investigate, but nevertheless, he says it seems to be a status quo, it seems to be a metzius, a reality at hand, that all of the Jewish communities in Eastern Europe, and we also see from the Takonos of the Rambam and other places, this was also in Slavic countries, that the fact was that everybody was investigated. The question is, what happened? Why do we have, on one hand, at least according to the Shittas about the Yerushalmi, and the Rishonah seems to be not the case. The Yerushalmi, it seems to be that there has to be investigation. At least according to Shittas Abavli, it seems to be that even without any prior chazaka, there's no need to investigate. And the Achronis Poskas Banein, the poskim of our times, discuss it. And they explain that there's a number of reasons. The reason why initially there was no need to investigate, it wasn't just a blind Xeros Akosov, a blind law. There were reasons behind it. And I'm going to mention 3 reasons which existed and why none of them exist today. The first reason is that the Rishonim bring why there's no need to investigate it, and a person's believed, even without any proof or even without any prior chazaka, any knowledge that it comes from Jewish family. Because we rely on the concept of Chazal called Roiv. Chazal gave us different rules which affect both the laws of Isser Beheter, laws of Kashrus, for example, and also affect laws of Yuchs. And according to the Kollel, according to the rule of Roiv, they said that the vast majority of people coming along saying I'm Jewish are Jewish. Well, this is not the case today. For whatever reasons, historical reasons, reasons of circumstances of where we live today, unfortunately, this is not the case anymore. And then, one of the reasons that the Jewish people went through Holocaust, the communist Russia, through reform conservative movements, through assimilations. And as a result, there's a huge amount of people that either think they're Jewish, they don't realize they're not, they really believe that they're Jewish, not coming to fool anybody, but they're not Jewish. It could be because, many such cases, that there was a non-halachic conversion. We'll discuss afterwards questions of conversions that affect our life today as far as Jewish status is concerned. So it could be a non-halachic conversion. I remember just recently, I was asked by a shliach in Hawaii to be able to approve. Hawaii is a destination wedding. People come from all around the world to have the weddings. That's an exotic island. And he told me everything looks very, very good, but he's a very, very ehrlich shliach, and he makes sure that every single couple, no matter what, is being properly certified. And we'll explain later why it has to be a rule without any exceptions. And the chosen, his name was Chaim Yaakov, that was written in the form Ben Harav Yerachmiel Halevi, and his mother's name was Feger Shein. So how non-Jewish could they be? But after very, very simple investigation, we saw that the father is a non-Orthodox rabbi, and his wife made a non-Orthodox conversion. So the chosen wasn't Jewish at all, despite the fact that they had such Jewish, and the kid himself never even thought he wasn't Jewish. He really believed he was. So that's the first thing, that many people come along and they think they're Jewish, either because the society where they come from, they think goes after the father, or because of non-halachic conversions, or for many, many other reasons. There's also situations where people actually falsify. It's a very, very unique phenomenon to our times. That never used to happen in olden times. In olden times, people had sometimes, because of anti-Semitism, they used to hide the fact that they were Jewish. Today we have situations when people actually have a lot of schuyot, a lot of privileges. You know, when they're immigrating, for example, from Eastern Europe, when they come to Germany, when the Gemeinde pays for a lot of the upkeep, they give them a lot of financial help in Israel, and so on and so forth, hires and joins, and we have thousands of forgeries and documents of people actually saying they're Jewish and not Jewish. So without going into too much detail, the idea of road doesn't apply. And the other two reasons, which I won't go into because this topic could really be in itself, this one lecture here could be divided into many lectures, but I'm trying to condense it. So we'll keep it very short, but there are all the other halakhic reasons that brought by the Rishonim why there was no need to investigate don't apply anymore today. Therefore, according to virtually all of the poskim, and it's the reality in the Tzias, looks like already from times of Vad Arba Rotzkis, from time of the Vad of the Full Acts, but especially today, this is a Tzias that everybody is being investigated. Now the question is, who do we investigate today? Who do we have to try to certify? And I'm using over here a takanon, a protocol that I published in the Sefer that Rabbi Brona mentioned before. This takanon has the support of the Rabbonim Aroshim, and this is something that is being sent to Rabbonim around the world to avoid the issues that we're talking about. So the first reason why, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why every single couple that comes, no matter who they are, that could be the Einiklach of a Hasidic Rebbe, but every single couple has to be certified by Best, without exception. The first reason is, it's called loy-plug. The only time people get upset, I'm talking from experience, when I'm talking to rabbis around the world, they tell me that I'm talking to a couple who the Chosin, I know. The Chosin comes from a very, very known Jewish, frum family. There's no need to investigate it. But the Kala, I don't know who she is, we'll have to investigate it. And the family of the Kala gets very insulted and very upset. Rightfully so. They feel being targeted. They're being, you don't believe us. So the only way that you can have a system that is respected on one hand, on the other hand doesn't insult anybody, if you make sure every single person being certified without exception. It's called a plug. And certainly in places like Eretz Yisrael, South Africa, England, in Australia, that doesn't matter who we are. My children married in some very, very nice, very Yuchasdika families. And nobody got upset when I said we have to do the same thing. I can't ask others to do what we do ourselves. And we all gave our ksubas, and we gave our documents, and we fill out a form. Because when everybody does it, then it's part of the system. I once gave a shiur to Rabbonim, one very famous rabbi very famous family, goes all the way to the Alter Rebbe. He was part of the shiur. He said, when I got married here in Brooklyn, not Houston, when I got married to a young lady in England, I was treated like everybody else. I had to fill out a form, I had to produce my documents. And we didn't mind because we saw everybody's doing it. So the first reason is low-plug, because the only way a system can work is it's done for everybody. The second reason is because ultimately sometimes you'll be surprised when you find out, it's an opportunity to find out certain things that you don't even know, certain problems that you don't know which exist. Again, we know that Baruch Hashem, in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of other children came back to Yiddishkeit. And sometimes the Haredi Rabbonim, into the communities that came into, didn't have the kelim or even the idea that you have to ask these questions. And as a result, sometimes we'll see a situation where once you do a very simple investigation, like for example, going back to this case of the Muslim boy marrying a Jewish from family. It wasn't difficult to find out that he wasn't Jewish. He wasn't asked. He wasn't asked to fill out any papers. He wasn't asked to produce any documents. It wasn't like this was like some kind of a very, very elaborate liar that fooled the system and he forged documents. That wasn't the case at all. It just happened to be that he acted religious and nobody asked him any questions. But if you ask questions, then sometimes you're able to do a family a tremendous favor by correcting a problem that they themselves didn't know which existed. I'm going to give you just a couple of examples. No, every single year we have a number of Chassanim or Kollels, sometimes even their parents, who go through what's called a gir, either gir mi'ikradin, either a gir which is required by the letter of the law, a gir misofik, out of doubt, which is also required by the letter of the law, but still there's an element of doubt, and sometimes a gir l'chumra, where there's a very small doubt, but still nobody wants to live even with a small doubt. And this all happened as a result of certain investigation. So I'll give a couple of examples. We had I have a Dayonos program which trains Rabbonim to become rabbis are specialized in certain areas of Jewish law. Within Gittin, within Kiddushin, within Yuchsin, Ebenezer, Mishpat, Geirus, and they become more attuned. Obviously, they're trained to be able to see these things. And one of my Talmidim, this goes back many years ago, probably 7, 8 years ago, he told me that he's a rabbi in a large community in America. I'm not going to mention, I always try to make sure that never to give any clues about who we're talking about. So one didn't mention the city, but it's a large community somewhere in the United States of America. And he says as a result of his community work with different members of the Kollel, he became aware of the fact that there are two families, very, very frum, respected families, and there's a very big doubt about the yichus. One of them is a question of imuts, of adoption, that the mother was adopted, and the only proof that you have of her Jewish status is a note given by the agency, the adoption agency, which is called the Leo Beck agency. I don't know if the word Leo Beck talk to anybody, speak to anybody. Leo Beck was one of the. So Leo Beck was one of the fathers of the Reform movement. So, on one hand, you can say, look, it's unlikely they would lie. But on the other hand, it definitely, according to halacha, doesn't have any nemonis, doesn't have any trustworthiness, because even the definition of what is a Jew is not the same as ours. So the fact that the whole family was accepted as being Jewish based on that note, at the very least, it creates a certain level of a doubt. And by now, we're talking about this particular family has 2 children, a girl married to a serious scholar who sits and learns all day in another community. And the other one is a boch who's not married. And my Talmud goes in, knocks on the door and says, excuse me, I have information that there's a problem with the yichus. Now, he might have other qualities, but doesn't possess too much of a quality of diplomacy or finesse. So it looks like he didn't say it in the most sensitive way, and they don't know where to go. But he has a bit of a thick skin to continue to go back and back and back and harass the family, until finally the son-in-law, the one who's a Ben Torah, because Rabbi said, Rabbi, can you tell your Talmud to leave us alone? He's really disturbing the whole, family. I said to him, look, I really can't vouch for the way he does it. Maybe he's not doing it in a very nice or sensitive way, but think about it. Forget about how he does it, but don't you think it should be corrected? There's definitely a doubt over here. So he says, look, our Rov, the Rov was a Pesach in that particular community, he'll give you a call, and whatever he decides, that's what we're going to do. So his Rov called me up, and I explained to him the situation. I said to him, kach v'kach, we have this level of doubt. I'm talking about, generations and generations for the future. So I said, would you misader Kiddushin for, a girl or a boy who has, for that problem? I said, definitely not. I said, would you allow your son or daughter to marry them? He says, no. So well, then you must tell them they have to correct it. It's very simple to correct. So he 100% agreed. And when I was in America, I've organized together, two of my Talmidim organized under our Besden a mikveh for them. She was already very heavily pregnant. So the child was included Baruch Hashem into it. And because it was only Misofik, so afterwards they didn't have to have a chuppah again, but we did the sinners in the past, Kiddushin without a bracha, and Baruch Hashem, he was corrected. About 2 years ago, I found out, also was very interesting how I found out about it, but I found out that the boy also, he went to his president in his city, and also the guy in the same way. The second story was much more dramatic. Second story, which the same Talmud discovered, was a very, very prominent family in the community. Also very Haredi, very religious, everything else. They had a number of kids, and over there the suffering was much greater, because we knew that the great-grandmother converted to Reform, and then her daughter reconverted, seemingly conservative, and somehow it fell through the cracks. When the mother of the kids became frum, so she was accepted into the community. She was married, Chuppah Kiddushin in the 80s, and now there's a few kids. There were 3 kids altogether, and nothing was done about it. And when I spoke to one of the Rabbanim in the community, each one was such a hot potato because it was such a well-connected and powerful family. Nobody wanted to touch this particular case. And each rabbi said, go to the other one. It's not my balabatim, and so on and so forth. Until one of the Rabbanim who actually deals with the family, he called me up with a very serious shaila that he had about something else. And I took the opportunity and I said to him, listen, we have this family, it has to be corrected. He says, but how can I tell them that there's a question? When I married them back in the 80s, I was almost out of Kedushin. I'm going to tell them there's a problem and what's going to happen with the kahuna, and now also to marry kahana. I said, listen, with kahana we can talk about it because it's a question of level of a suffix. But one thing is for sure, there's a serious question. Whether they're Jewish or not, if right now you're going to tell them that there's a problem, we could fix it in a very dignified way. Nobody has to know about it. It could be very, very quiet. But once they become their own shidduchim websites, you can see the names. Once they become engaged, it has to be revealed. So listen, right now I'm dealing with a lot. Give me a couple of months, I'll deal with it. He never dealt with it. And right before COVID, when I was in the States, I get a call from also a Haredi man, and he says to me, listen, my daughter is about to get engaged. And the Rav, this Rav tells me, don't close the shidduch until you speak to Rabbi Ulman. He mentions that particular name. So I said to him, listen, I'm not telling you that this boy is not Jewish, but there has to be a tefillah, there has to be some sort of a gear, some sort of a conversion. And the mother first was very upset, but then she came around. Interesting, the reaction of people. There's another sister who was a young girl who was already in her late 20s, and she called me up and she found out about it. She says, Rabbi Ulman, I just found out about the question that you raised. I want to do it as quickly as possible. I can't live one extra day with any doubt in my Jewishness, and I think maybe that's the reason why I can't find the shidduch, she tells me. I organized before the Pesach, and the mother came around, so all the kids, including the mother, they all had a gear misofik to eliminate doubt, and that is Baruch Hashem came, and this happens, by the way, every single year. So we see over here that the importance of doing a bir. Again, even with families that we know, there's no question at all. It's a question of plug. You can't single people out and separate them. But at the same time, sometimes you find out certain questions that you never even thought existed. The third reason, to which I will dedicate another lecture this week, but I'll mention this now. And this is really a very, very serious question. And that is not a chiddush in our times. This is something that was investigated from times of the Gemara. People don't realize that this concept of a couple going through a basin, it's not a new concept. It existed from the times of the Gemara. Even according to those opinions that said that if somebody says they're Jewish, you believe them, even according to that opinion, there still have to be an investigation. Why? And this is really the third reason which I want to mention. The whole section of Evan HaEzra, marriage, divorce, and everything between, it contains hundreds and hundreds of halachas to do with yuchsin, which have nothing to do with the Jewish text. It has to do with mamzeres and kehuna and chalitza and many, many other things that are so involved and so nuanced, so complicated, that starting already from the Chazal, from the Gemara, we are told that it's only allowed to be handled by Botadin and Poskim who actually deal with this. So I'm going to quote you a Gemara. This Gemara is in a couple of places, but I'm going to quote from Gemara Kiddushin. The Gemara says, the Omer Rav Yehuda Omar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Kol she'elu yodeh b'tiv gittin v'kiddushin lo elu esek imoi. Whoever is not proficient in the area of gittin and kiddushin, and gittin and kiddushin, we'll see in a second what it means. It doesn't just mean how to recite kiddushin or how to be able just to go through Seder again, but it means all the intricacies and complications of yuchsin. He should have nothing to do with it. Rashi says, Betiv Gittin, Milchasei, to the laws of Gittin, Lo'iyo Esekemon. You should have nothing to do with it. Liyois Dayan Bedover, Shemayatir Isur Erva, not to decide whether this particular couple should get married, because you may allow a biblical prohibition, even if it's two Jewish, a Jewish chassid and a Jewish Kollel. He may allow Isur Erva. Erva means a prohibited marriage. And this is a crookedness, a wrong that you can never ever fix. When somebody makes a mistake in Choshen Mishpat and in the Din Torah, he can always say, "Listen, okay, I made a mistake. We have to pay up, and either he'll pay from his own pocket, or he'll pay, or he'll reverse the decision." If somebody made a mistake in Hilchos Kashrus, I'm not Chas Shalom minimizing in any way any other isurim, but for other things, like it's brought in Perek Zayin time, that you could do tshuva. When it comes to a situation of a wrong marriage, it's something that cannot be fixed. I'll give you one example before I'll show you what talks about the Shulchan Aruch about this question. I was asked a number of years ago by a rabbi in America to certify a couple getting married in Israel. And the Israel Rabbanut needed a letter from a person which they recognized. So I looked into it, and when it came to the Kollel, the rabbi who married her parents was a very diligent Rav, American Rav, a Yedei Sefer, somebody who's not an Amor, somebody who studied in yeshiva, and a very, very big Yireh Shamayim, very God-fearing person, who really went through a very, very extensive birur, clarification, to allow her parents to get married. And I was privy to the tick, to the case file that he put together. I saw that he gathered all the documents to prove that the chassan was Jewish, and I was the father of this girl getting married now in Israel. I saw that he put many documents to prove that the Kollel, that the mother, was Jewish. The mother was an almona, she was a widow. So he made sure to get a death certificate that will show that the husband is no longer alive, to make sure that there's no question that she's not married anymore. And after doing all of this extensive work, he was Masada Kiddush. What he didn't realize was that the dead husband never had any children, but he had a brother, and he missed out the very, very important, and not just important, but crucial din that this lady cannot get married without a chalitza. Now, did this Rav know about a chalitza? 100%. He studied Chumash, and Chumash in Parshas Kiseitze. It talks about the law of chalitza. Every child who studies Chumash knows about it. But somebody that is not proficient in this halacha, someone that doesn't deal with Ebenezer, he will not
pick it up right away. And this was an example of what Rashi says over here, that's Ivus she'eina yochel liskon, something that's a terrible, terrible tragedy. I'm not going to go into the implications of what's had to be given and everything else, but one thing is for sure, that something that couldn't be fixed, it became a tremendous trauma for the family who was now a full family. So based on this Gemara, there's many Rishonim that discuss it. And then you have a Shulchan Aruch in similar mitas that quotes the Gemara. And on this Shulchan Aruch, there is a machlekes achrayim. What does it mean? Lo iya lo esek kemoy, that it shouldn't have anything to do with it. There is an opinion of the Taz and the Beis Shmuel who maintain that it doesn't mean that you have to be an expert in Ebenezer to Mesader Kedushin. As long as the Mesader Kedushin sends it to a Bezdin, somebody else can Mesader Kedushin, even if it's a rabbi, and not a Pesach or a Dayan. Others, for example, the Marsham, the Brizhan Rov, and the Divrei Malkiel and other poskim say no. Even to Mesader Kedushin, you still need to be one of those. When the Gemara and Rashi and the Shulchan Aruch talk about Lo iya esek kemoy, that you should have anything to do with it, applies even to Mesader Kedushin. Lahalocha, on the practical level, when it comes to regular communities, I think it's accepted for a good reason. It doesn't make sense if you have a rabbi of a shul, a pulpit rabbi, or rabbi of Beis Chabad, that he shouldn't be able to perform a marriage. I maintain that everybody should go through a course of civic Kedushin, because it's not as simple as it seems. It's not just about going through a digest and learning, the Seder and what you say at every particular time. There's much more intricate than that. But it's something which is very, very doable for every rabbi to go through a course of how to Mesader Kedushin. So we're not saying that a rabbi who has a synagogue or he has a pulpit job or a Beis Chabad or community, that he should abstain from Mesader Kedushin, because it's a very, very powerful way to connect a family, and it's something which makes sense. The family wants somebody they're close with to Mesader Kedushin. In the Haredi communities, it became more of a custom that the Asa, somebody who is the head of the community, is one of Mesader Kedushin, not to give it to anybody. But that's where it depends on the community. But one thing which nobody argues about is this question of that every single couple has to be, and over here it doesn't matter which couple it is, whether it's a couple which is great yichus, every single couple has to be certified by Bezdin, because without it, it could be me'uvas she'en yochel liskon. Last thing I want to discuss, because it's getting close to the end of this lecture, I'm going to give some time for questions. That there are many, many other questions that come up. For example, at which point should rabbis ask people to bring proof? Only when they're getting married? What about bar mitzvah? What about a naming of a girl? What about a bas mitzvah and so on and so forth? The answer is, for many, many reasons. I believe that it is also essential that, when somebody comes to our synagogue and we start asking for proof, that they may walk out and never come back again. So there's no chiyuv to, unless there is a reason to suspect something, there's no reason to be able to doubt a person when he comes to shul, says, listen, I just moved into the area of Dr. Ben Aliyah. In such a case, we can rely on the fact that the person says that I'm a yid is becheskes kashrus, because it's mainly to do with yuchsin, that the poskim have mandated to have this birur. But when an opportunity comes, and by opportunity I mean that any kind of a request for a service that requires a person to be Jewish, then I believe it's a responsibility of a rabbi to also do exactly the same birur as if he was getting married. And I'll give you also a couple of reasons for it. First of all, the people themselves are getting a little bit upset when they have to go throughout life through multiple clarifications. Sometimes, when we started this whole system in Sydney, We used to have, a couple coming to us, and the guy says, look, I grew up in this community. I have my bris here, I have my mitzvah here. Why couldn't they do it then? Why have to do it over and over again? And they have a point. If we have a situation when somebody was already certified, when he was bar mitzvah, for example, and go when she was bar mitzvah, and now they're coming to get married, it'll take 5 minutes for an expert to go through all the other questions of Yuchsin. They're more complicated and require more knowledge, but they're much faster than investigating and getting documents. So that's the first reason, that we're actually doing the favor, and later on it'll be much less stressful. There's also a greater question, that today we live in a world where people use all kinds of reasons to accept somebody's Jewishness. For example, we had a situation where in Sydney, where a lady who went through Jewish day school, and she was very traditional family. She met a young man. She never would have gone out with him if she had any doubts that he was Jewish. And he proudly told her that he had a bar mitzvah with this and this Chabad community in America. And she never doubted after that. She thought, there's no way that this particular rabbi would have conducted a bar mitzvah for him if he wouldn't be Jewish. And they went out and they were engaged. And it was a very, very tragic story which we won't go into, but something that people suffered as a result of somebody doing a bar mitzvah for them without investigating. I remember we had a case in Sydney, it's also a very case in point, that in Sydney, all the moyalim, all the circumcises are under the best. So whatever they do, they have a protocol, who they can mount, who they can't mount, all different things. And I received the phone call, this goes back quite a number of years ago, probably 12 years ago. I get a call from one of the moyalim, and he tells me that a girl from Russia gave birth to a child, and she wanted to do bris. So this was a Thursday. I said to him, listen, Monday, I'm flying to Eretz Yisrael. So tell him I gave all my contact details to make sure we'll do a birur beforehand. So he calls me on Monday. I'm sitting I'm about to turn off my phone on a plane. He says, you should call yourself. No, I should have a call. So what do we do? I said, you wait till I come back. I said, what about Vayom Hashmini, on the 8th day, supposed to circumcise? I said, he has to wait. More important, we should certify them to do it on the 8th day. He says, can we make because I know the family is for sure Jewish, can we perhaps do the bris and then bring the documents later? I said to him, listen, if there's a problem, they'll never come back. Once the bris, he says, but what about if we over here make an exception? Because I know they went through Jewish days for another older sister, I did a bris and older sister. Can we make an exception? Do it? I said, listen, we have to be consistent. If sometimes we'll do it, sometimes we're not going to do it. We'll never know what we've done or what we haven't done. So let's be consistent. Let's do it the way we decided over here. When I went to Eretz Yisrael, I went to visit the Rabbi Roshi who was then. It was a very special place called Rabbi Mar. And one of the things that I told him was, I said, look, there's certain takanos that are made, but it was al das atzmi. I never really discussed with any other authority. And I want to know your opinion. We have a rule in Sydney that if it's a conflict between doing a bris on time or doing a birur, we'll push up the bris. He says, you're 100% right. He said to me, in Israel, we have a problem that the moyalim, they're supposed to be under the Rabbanut, but it's impossible to be able to control it. And we have saw that there's cases, which also, by the way, had, when American rabbi conducted a wedding on a girl, because they produced a photo that a brother had a bris when he was a young boy, by a moil with a long beard and a erlich hamoil. So the rabbi said, of course, the girl is Jewish because the brother must be Jewish, and he performed the wedding. So he told me, you're 100% right, and you have to push up the bris and continue with your takon. When I came back to Australia, so obviously the bris didn't take place, and the realized they have to come and see me. To make a long story short, it wasn't a question of not being able to find proof. The mother of the girl who gave birth was 100% non-Jewish. There wasn't any question about it. The father was a Jew. Father is a Jew. The question, how come it became such a known thing that the Moyle thought without any question they were Jewish, and they were able to find a way into the Jewish school, and that particular school was very careful with mediality. They now became more careful, but they accepted it. How did they accept it? The answer is when they came to Australia, they moved into a particular neighborhood. And they went to the shul, the father went to the shul, and they told him that they're having these bas mitzvah, these bas mitzvah groups they have. Bas mitzvah, they're accustomed to have together with a whole bunch of girls. So they're having a bas mitzvah group, and they asked him to join. Now, this particular rabbi in those days was a very conscientious rabbi who came to the wedding. He never thought for bas mitzvah to ask any questions. The guy comes along, he had a very Jewish surname, the father. They assumed that they were all Jewish, and they accepted the girl and the sister to the bas mitzvah class. Afterwards, she received a certificate. She went through bas mitzvah in this Orthodox shul. The day school accepted it, and it was a chain reaction. The day school, the tragedy was that the boy with whom she had a child, he wasn't a from boy at all. And Haraya, they were not even married. But to him, he never ever would have had a child with non-Jewish lady. He was close enough to Yiddishkeit. And the fact that she went through a Jewish school, to him, it was like a proof that she was Jewish. So we see that there is such an important idea that whenever they come to us for anything that requires to be Jewish, for example, in those shuls which have membership, not every shul today has a membership. The shul has a membership, and membership by constitution requires it to be Jewish. You can say, in order to provide you with this service, people understand it, by the way. Even the civil government requires documents in order to give you certain services. So when it comes to them asking you for a service, it becomes also an obligation to be able to do a proper birur. And of course, Allah has come when it comes to marriage. The final thing which I want to talk about is the question of Giyurim, which became a very controversial topic today, also a very topical issue. Anybody who follows the Israeli politics, one of the things that they are now targeting, the new government, to make reform in Giyurim and to make it free for all, to allow any, until now in Israel, for example, it's all under Rabbanut, under the chief rabbinate. And the new government wants to make every single rabbi who's a rabbi of any city to be able to do his own conversions. Now, what's the problem with that? We know that until recently, it was a very simple consideration. We had Orthodox conversions, halachic conversions, and we had non-halachic conversions, such as Reform and so on and so forth. And that was very black and white. But in the later years, they developed a situation, which I will explain in this Hashem, which necessitated the need to create lists of accepted botadim and those are not accepted. And I want to explain, because at first glance it looks like a bit of a monopoly of politics. I want to explain why I believe not only it's not politics, why it's so essential. We live in a world today that recognizes there are certain key words that became part of our vocabulary: transparency, accountability, standards. And we'll know that those words, they actually protect us. Because when we go to doctors, and doctors are bound by certain standards, because they belong to an establishment that protects the standards, that protects the consumer, the client. And this applies to virtually every single tchum, every single area of our life today. People recognize the need for it. For some reason, the same people who recognize the need to have accountability and standards in every other area of life, they believe for some reason that when it comes to halacha, anybody should be able to do it. And that is something which will create a situation where there's lack of accountability. Automatically, when a person does whatever they want, it lowers the standards and it puts into question sometimes the acceptability and the legitimacy of what's being done. And this is recognized especially in America, because when it comes to many communities like England, like I said, Australia, or South Africa, there's an established botadim, and they do gittim, they do giyurim, and so on and so forth. And everybody knows if you want to go through here, you go to a festival. When it comes to America, for whatever reason, it was always very decentralized. And every rabbi, there was a few botadim, like in America, I would have said about it, but basically it was part of the tradition that a rabbi in a shul would conduct a giyur. And over the years, it became very put under question, because how do we know? You know, again, we wouldn't put up with a doctor to be somebody that is not accountable to anybody. We wouldn't go for it. Nobody would go to such a doctor, right? He would be afraid. Who knows what he's doing? Or to anybody else, to a lawyer, to an architect, to a builder. If you want to build a house and you go to build it that is not accountable to anybody, how do we know that he's actually going to adhere to any standards? So the same thing happened when it came to questions of Yehoram. And for that reason, there was a world list established in order to protect the consumer. And the challenge that we have, what do we do when we have a situation when people come, and this is a question I get on a daily basis from rabbis, from shluchim, from online schools. How do we deal with people coming in, either with the kids or themselves, and they were converted by a Besdin which is not accepted. It's Orthodox Besdin, but it's not accepted. And over here there has to be a very, very delicate approach, because on one hand, to say that they are goyim, I wouldn't say that. On the other hand, there's a reason why there has to be respect for a system. By the way, it's not a new concept. The Rambam talks about it already 850 years ago, where he discusses a conversions done by Botedin and by Hediotis, people who are not ad hoc, people gathered together. So this concept exists in all the times. And the Rambam says also that we have to be able to watch out for them, not just accept the conversions of Hediotis, not because they're radically apostle, but because they're under question. And there is a way how to deal with it. There was a I'm being very, very open with everybody. It's not, everything we do is not, it's not a secret. We in Australia, we're very blessed to have the systems involved. There was a situation here a number of years ago when there was in Melbourne specifically, not in Sydney, when there was somebody wanted to create an easier way to convert by teaching them over here, sending to Israel and converting under a not registered, not accepted Besdin. And as a result of it, all the Botedin in Australia, all the Dayanim in Australia put out a clarification article explained in the newspaper, explaining why it wouldn't be accepted anywhere in the world, not in Israel, not in America, not in Europe, and so on and so forth, not in Australia, and why Gerus affects the whole community. And anybody who went through this year has to be reconverted again. And we're going to assist them. And some people came through. And I remember that one evening, and if Rabbi remembers it, but there was a sitter call in the evening, him and another rabbi in the community, that there was a bris happening the following morning with a lot of people invited. And found out that the child was born from a lady converted from such a Besdin. And I said to him, look, we have to be able to do it in a way, to one hand, just to be able to ignore that it's making a joke out of any kind of a system and all the standards we achieved over here. On the other hand, not to merachik the family. So I discussed, I spoke to the family and I explained to them that on one hand, we don't question authority and the motives for conversion, but we explained why we cannot accept the conversion the way it is. And we agreed that if they will, that if they will agree to reconvert, the priest will go through. Just we'll have 3 rabbis observing it without even anybody knowing about it. And Baruch Hashem, this couple afterwards, they completed the conversion. And today they're very, very beautiful, beautiful family here in this community. So we see that the question of the Taharas and Yuchsin, the question of the integrity of Yuchsin is the core survival of the Jewish people. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, in a conversation with one of the great poskim of our generation, Rabbi Nasha Cotton, they had a meeting in the early 80s. I think it was maybe mid-80s, 84, 85. And the Rebbe mentioned to him that now there is a need for a Sefer Yuchsin. There has to be proper lists in communities because there's so many problematic questions and so many unaccounted for weddings and so on and so forth. There has to be a proper database that will ensure the continuity of Jewish people. And afterwards, the Rebbe sent him an urgent note saying to him that he thought about it, and he thinks that it won't work on the international level, but it has to be done in each community. That certain technical problems, why on the national level it may not have success. Now, it's not to create something, but if every community will have their own system and which safeguards the integrity of the Jewish status, that will be a part in a larger system of the eternal continuity of our people. Thank you very much. And You can raise up.
I have a question. Do you have a minute?
Yeah, I'll take a question. I just want to say that some of the questions, some of the topics which we discussed in the other sessions, which would be number one, how genetics, DNA, can be used to assist people to establish the status, can be altogether, and if yes, under what circumstances. Fertility questions, which are developing with the speed of light in our generation, and also afterwards problems and solutions when you have a Jewish boy and Jewish girl getting married. And now we'll have some questions. Yes, I think it was first.
How to do with genetics, DNA, currently available. Should that?
That's not it's okay. I'm going to discuss it. There's a whole section. It's something which cannot be. Yes.
In instances where an ad hoc spacing or an individual role does appear, it's not automatically that the garish is the suspect, is it? Or the after presumably many times is okay.
So if I receive a garish certificate from the 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s, from individual rabbis in America, I look who they are. If I see that they were all Yerushalayim rabbis, and I have no reason to suspect that there was a joke and there was no Kabbalah mitzvahs, there's no Kabbalah mitzvahs, then I would accept it, because there was no, in those days, that was the culture of America, and there was no lists. But once you're talking about conversions which are done in the 21st century, they're always suspect for a number of reasons. Apart from the fact that these particular Orthodox are not on the list, there's also a question of integrity and honesty. At least you should tell the people you're converting. There's certain rabbis who know nobody will accept it with you. And at the very least, the people should know, and I should tell, listen, I'm warning you, I'll convert you, but nobody will accept you. At least that much should be told. Again, I'm not saying that we'll pass look outright, but definitely a suspect. Yes?
How do you differentiate, as the Beit, how do you differentiate in a candidate between their academic achievement as part of the Gary program and their change of character, change of their spirit, etc., and that this is not just a passing fad.
Right.
This is real,
Right.
it's permanent and it's soul changing,
Right.
rather than they've just been able to learn the required material.
It is a very good question. You're 100% right that the commitment is much more important than academic achievements. A person can be very, very great, have a great intellect, and then not study, pass the exams, but we would have to know that they are actually practicing what they're learning. And part of the process is to ensure that that's why the process doesn't take 5 minutes. It takes a certain amount of time, but part of it is to be able to observe the candidate living a Jewish life of Torah mitzvahs for an extended amount of time. Yes.
Ulman, just a quick amplifiers. I just want to say today's Hayom Tov is about, says the person must put on tefillin. Just as he has to put on tefillin, he must think for half an hour about the education of a child and help him in the direction in which he is going. Now, I'd like to bring that into the same discussion you've had here, which you've hinted that to some extent you do. But where you have people who are going in a certain direction, and then you have someone knocking on the door and telling them, oh, at the mitzvah, you're not Jewish, that's not helping them go in the direction that they meant to go. What I believe needs to happen is you need to add a component here which is supported to say, we understand that you are committed. However, you have to get the paper, it goes to the last, addresses the last question, to say that we will give you that paper because you are committed. You didn't get it, but now we can see you are committed. Why do they have to go through a whole years when in fact you have evidence for that? That's just one question. The other question is, and I brought this up once over 30 years ago, the question of who is a Jew. Basically, I believe you are born, what you mentioned, by Ger, and by a mother who's Jew, you are born Jewish or you become Jewish. Whether you're a Jew, this is just academic opinion, but whether you're a Jew depends on whether your grandchildren are Jewish. So when you live your life as a Jew, then we will see that because you have Yaakov Avinu, he's living because we are alive. That makes you a Jew. What makes you Jewish is what you said. So to become Jewish is not to be a Jew, it's to be Jewish. And now become a Jew. And I think we need to look at everybody as Jewish. And if you want to become better Jewish, Baruch Hashem, that's what you need to do. And you need to be helping them and not be just a gatekeeper or, in fact, a master. And just one more point, the medical boards, for instance, in this corona, you see that wait a minute, they just listen. In this corona, you see that what they're doing is they're telling the doctors, don't treat the patient because we'll strike you off if you give them the treatment, because they don't want them to be doctors, they want them to push the vaccine. So you have to be careful. I believe you need to lead the way and not follow these goyish shugas, and you need to show that you can do it better.
Just to pick up on one point that you mentioned, obviously, when we do creating those systems and when we're training rabbis to do those investigations, you're 100% right that it's very important to develop a system how you're doing it. For example, when I interview a couple getting married, it's done in a way they don't feel they're going through an interrogation. As a matter of fact, we developed a very sometimes a very good relationship with the couple that we interviewing, to the extent, we had couples who came from America to Sydney, they came to us for Shabbos. It's never ever done in a harsh way or in a way that pushes them away. On the contrary, they come to respect it and like the system. For example, in Sydney, every couple knows they have to go through the couple person before they get married. It's never viewed upon as some kind of a harsh detective work of an investigation. It's viewed as a pleasant experience, which they obviously an exception sometimes if somebody tries to, but as a rule, that's the way it is. So thank you for your remarks. And yes.
Thank you for your review, Rabbi, and you mentioned Leo there, and it's about the certification. I want to say the word police in his defense that he was helpful to the previous rabbi in escaping from Nazi Europe. He made that, as you know, at that time. Just that for us.
Yeah. It wasn't in any way a negative statement. He was a person. It was more that the agency that is named after him is obviously not based on Orthodox standards. But thank you for your remark. I apologize. I'll turn my back. I didn't see from the Ezra's notion. Yes.
Which particular documents do you ask for?
Oh.
And then the second part also is when you ask the sounds like there's a question. How do you rely on the accuracy of the honestly, if they're actually not going to go forward?
You asked the question that it's an excellent question, but it's very, very difficult to answer in a couple of words. But I'll try to summarize a couple of things. First of all, when it comes to actual Bir Yadus there's two things. There is Bir Yadus, which is Jewish certification, and there's Yuchsim, which is general.
Not the same.
It's not the same because, like I'm going to talk about in one of the lectures this week, where both could be Jewish and still problem. For example, he's a Kohen and she can't marry a Kohen. That's many, many examples of such situations. But generally speaking, the question of Jewishness and the documents that you would require very much depends on where they come from. And you can't compare South Africa and England to America. Why? Because in South Africa and America and England, for decades, every single wedding had to go through the central registry, through the Beth Din. And therefore, if we see a ksuba of the parents getting married, that's a very, very almost a full proof that the child is Jewish. Because we know that it wasn't a particular rabbi who would have known who he was or what methods he used to relying on a whole system that existed in a particular country. When it comes to America, it's very, very different because in America we have in my files a collection of many ksubas by Orthodox rabbis who didn't check anybody. Like, if somebody would learn a ksuba, they would announce this Muslim guy to be Jewish, you understand? But generally speaking, Moshe Feinstein, he gave over to his students 3 main categories of proof, evidence, not proof, but evidence of Jewishness. One of them is documents, and documents that, depending on where you come from, if somebody comes from Russia, there's hardly any ksubas from there, so you can't ask them for ksuba with you, but there are other ways to be able to look at documents and know how to read birth certificates to find. I just want to tell you that there was a course that I've given on the Chubah B'Kiddushin for about 70 rabbis. It was a certain organization that organized this course. And myself and another rabbi called Rabbi Mordechai Farkash, we oversaw the course and gave some lectures. And one of the things I spoke about is about a protocol, how to address every single wedding. So the participants started to do it, and there were 2 shocking stories that came out of it. One story I'll tell you in another lecture, because it's more applicable to the other question of other Yehoram. But one story was that there was a lady that the Kollel that he was going to marry, and she received a letter of certification from a very, very respected Beis Din in America, saying that she was Jewish. Now, this particular rabbi was marrying her now. She got this certification when she married the first time. This was second marriage. So this rabbi wanted me to certify that. And I told him, he called me up back in May. I said to him, look, let's do it by the way. And they procrastinated. And they sent in the paperwork and the application form on the Friday. I mean, it was already Shabbos in Australia. It was Friday in America. And I was leaving to Israel on a Sunday. So I wasn't very happy that on the day that I'm leaving, I have to interview them. But he asked me, said, look, he really has to be able to tell them that he can marry them. And as soon as I saw her paperwork, I right away, she came from Ukraine, I right away saw that it was a forged document. Immediately, because it's something that you can tell. It said over there Yeveika, which means she's Jewish, and it says Yeveika on the mother, and it says Yeveika on the grandmother. But it had so many red flags. So as soon as I hung up the phone, I have an organization that I work with that is able to go to the archives and dig up the original archives. And by the time I came to Israel, I was able to see them. And it was all forged, and in the original document they said they were complete going. The grandmother was a non-Jewish lady, and the mother was a non-Jewish lady. The mother married a Jew, but she wasn't Jewish herself, and this girl wasn't Jewish. So documents have to be read by specialists. It's not just because somebody's documents say they're Jewish automatically that's the way it is. But the Moshe Feinstein documents is number one. Number two, things like Jewish language when somebody talks Yiddish. On its own, it's not good enough. Somebody speaks Yiddish. You can't just say because somebody talks Yiddish, therefore the Jewish. But it's one of the 2/3. And the third one, which today is especially dangerous to use, is knowledge of, somebody says, my grandmother did this and she cashed the meat and we did because today with internet and Google, people become prepared for these things. So that's why you have to be taking much more grain of salt when they come and tell you what all of the things they're doing. But there are things that we can know.
All 3 necessary.
2 out of 3. 2 out of 3 are necessary. And but when we talk to them, most things we don't rely on the honesty. There are certain things that we do rely on the honesty, and if you don't ask the question, there's no chance to get an answer. For example, one of the questions which we introduced, I'm going to discuss it in another session. If the child was born from a fertility, for example, from an egg donor or something like that, a surrogate mother, right? Over here, it's something that it's very, very difficult to locate because the laws are made in such a way that nobody's privy to. It's not adoption where you can actually find out about adoption. So there are a couple of things which are still in the minority, and you don't suspect anybody. Just ask the question relying on the honesty. But most things we don't rely on honesty. Most things we'll be able to find out ourselves. Yes. Is this going to be taped to questions and answers? Is it going to be recorded? Can we tell it the? Can we tell it the recording sound? I'll repeat the question. This is going to be recorded. It's possible to. Look, the answer is that as far as the Masada, the main responsibility is on the Masada Kiddush. That's the main responsibility. On the one who's conducting the wedding. In this particular case, a simple, not very professional questioner would have been sufficient to find out that was the case. It just, this particular young man, he somehow assimilated into the Jewish community. He knew how to be able to speak. If you see a clip of his wedding and you see how he spoke on his wedding, it spoke like a typical young, Sephardi, frum boy, right? So no questions were asked, which is wrong in itself. As far as the question of people who witnesses and so on and so forth, it depends on the situation. Sometimes, if they ask the witnesses by wedding when they know that the Rav acts professionally and does what he's supposed to be doing, they don't have to question him and ask him, we're not going to sign till we check it ourselves, you understand? Depends on the situation. Sometimes, if they themselves feel there's a certain level of suspicion, it's their job, and they know nothing was done to be able to investigate, they have to speak out.
In that case, this Muslim man, he actually covered two of the Moshe's. He showed probably some message.
Well, I told you that the third one today is not so anymore, and without documents, one of them has to be documents. One of them has to be documents. You have to be able, and you have to be able to fill out the form just to check out other useful questions. And then with filling out a form, we'll be able to tell a lot.
Is there any halakhic way that a GER applicant who's in the GER program can request the Beit Din to expedite the remainder of the program, because they've been participating in the Jewish community for many years, and they feel that they've actually reached the point where they're ready. And
That's something which
learning on the job.
Yeah, it's a possible time. It has to be spoken to the president, and they would know what to do. The particular president that deals with it.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Ulman. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And the program continues in Israel again tomorrow at 10 a.m. with the new arrangement, which I'm sure everybody's been informed that all the shiurim are held here in this room for the men and women jointly due to certain circumstances. And again, questions can be asked. And still, I think Ulman will stay here now for another few questions, but privately, so we could adjourn the session. Thank you very much.
Well, it's half an hour. It's half an hour.
You just said that.
158, 28 minutes. Stay here till 2:05.
So what? Yeah.
How would you be like?